well, I'm going to tell the story that I want to read
Mm-hmm.
because I don't see myself represented in these stories. I can think of a couple of authors, female Black authors that are saying, let me tell my story. Even myself, as a Latin American, I want to tell my story.
Yeah.
So I feel that in a way, you choose. In a way, you choose.
Yeah.
You choose. And that's something that we forget, that we choose the story that we want to say.
Welcome to Storytelling Insights, art, science, and great conversations with storytelling insights from researchers, artists, teachers, and many more.
Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Beatrix Acevedo, who is an artist and educator. And we're going to talk all about storytelling, Beatrix. So actually, let's just maybe start by learning a bit more about you and your work.
Me and my own story. Well, once upon a time, I think that I am one of those people who you cannot put in a box because I work in art and education. And I feel that education is an art too. And there is a lot of things that we can learn from an artistic practice in education.
Yeah.
So I'm a Colombian person originally. I came to the UK like 19 years ago, and I've been working in education and in art for the same time here in the UK, really.
Wow. I was actually listening to your interesting podcasts that you do for your students in your lecturing role, in your sort of academic educational side. And you've got 2 episodes on storytelling. So I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into to what your thoughts are on storytelling, how you use it in your work and so on. So I guess what is the role of storytelling in your role? What do you think the role of storytelling is generally? But starting with your role, where's the power there for you?
Well, I think that we are all made of stories and people connect with the stories. Yeah. And let's talk first about education. I think that when we are talking about education, the old model of education was about delivering content. But even in that model, it's not enough just to present a number of data or information. You need to engage passionately with your audience. And this is where storytelling comes in. Mm-hmm. So you can always connect the way that you are teaching something with a story. And those stories are more memorable than any equation, any data, any information that you have. For example, I teach a lot about sustainability. And sustainability, the problem with sustainability is that it's something so abstract, like somebody else, the problems are too big. But the idea is how I do with my students a lot, how sustainability works for you, how gender equality works for you, how reducing discriminations work for you, how responsible consumption works for you. And tell me your story. So I think that I think I cannot conceive education. I feel that education is an storytelling and a story sharing and a story co-design or collaboration or co-creation. So we are sharing our stories in the world of education. Yeah. And very similarly in the world of art, in the world of art, you are actually telling a story through a device, through an artifact. And without the story, the artifact wouldn't have any sense.
Yeah.
Let me think of an example. Tracey Emin's bed. You see the Tracey Emin's bed, you think, what is that? It's a bed.
So we're talking about the art that she did at the was it the Tate Modern?
Yeah, it was. She won the Turner Prize in the 1990s with the bed, which is called My Bed.
Yeah. So Tracey Emin, just so the viewers who watch this, if they want to know, so Tracey Emin's an artist, and she put was it an unmade bed that she had actually slept in, and it was very personal. It was actually her bed, wasn't it? And she put it on display and then displayed it as art. Is that right?
Well, that is an interesting thing that you're saying. Is her bed? Is not her bed? What is the story behind it?
Right.
So yes, let's describe the work of art. It was a work of art that received a Turner Prize in the 1990s, and it was basically an a representation of a bed over a single woman in her 30s who like to go around in the city, who like to drink, who is independent, but who has also a number of issues. Yeah. So the story that she told, when you see the bed per se, you think, what is this? But when you say, you think this is a story and this is a statement as a woman in the 1990s of how I live my life, my independence, my sexual life, etc. It might not be even Tracy Emin's own bed, but what she's saying is this is a story of a woman in a particular moment in time, and I'm going to show it to you. But the bed without the story doesn't make sense. Yeah, you need both to connect, and also your own story with the object, because you are saying, or I hate it, or I don't like it, or what is this? So that relationship, you are creating your own narrative too when you are appreciating a work of art.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So context really, the story is giving the context for what we observe, and then the meaning then is, some of the meaning, I guess, is given with the story, but is some of that meaning also up to you as well?
Yes, I think that there are so many stories, the stories are, the beautiful thing about the stories is that they are living organisms, they move, they evolve. You are listening to a story, and then when you're going to tell it again, you tell it in a different manner in the way that you listen to it. Your meaning about the story might be different. The elements of the story that call your attention are different to the person that you hear it from. And that is the fascinating thing about it. And I don't know if you've read, I read the book a while ago by Tahir Shah. Well, he is a writer. His father was storytelling in Afghanistan. He lives now in London. Now, he's a writer, and then he, out of the blue, he decides to move his family to Morocco, to Casablanca. And in Casablanca, he makes friends with the people around him. And one of them said, he's from the Berber tradition, and he said, everybody has a story, his own story. It's not your, let's say, it's not your, the story of your life, but the story, a fairy tale, a poem, a song, that is yours. So he's like, oh my God, I am the son of a storyteller. I need to find my story. So he goes all around Morocco to kind of capture that old tradition of storytellers in the big square in Marrakesh, in little tiny towns, etc. But it's fascinating, and I feel from there. I have been asking my friends, what is your story? What is that story that talks about you, that that represents you? So I feel that the power of stories is incredible for everything, really.
Yeah. It's really fascinating, this idea of identity and I guess how stories shape our identity, maybe. I mean, would you say that what makes, I know this question about identity is a commonly discussed theme and topic, and it's a big question, but as it pertains to the part about stories, so this guy, he finds out that in the Berber tradition, his ancestors were storytellers, so he needs to find out what his story is. Would you say that that's really important for people, their story, to find out what that story is, or do they just need to create one? Like, where is the importance of the story in as it relates to identity?
I feel that, I don't know, there are several layers here. The way that you tell your story is the way that you build your identity. So in the way that I started, you asked me, what is my story? I'm a Colombian artist, educator, being here. But I could have also told another story. I could have said, I'm a dreamer. I inhabit the realm of dreams. I work with the creatures of the oniric creatures, the surrealism. I could have said you whatever thing, and you
Yeah.
would have believed it, because why not? And I am not lying either.
Yeah.
Because
It's true, isn't
but
it? Yeah.
yeah, it's true. And the way that we build our identity. So this is so important also to tell. I'm not going to say that an authentic or inauthentic story, but I'm going to say the story that you want to hear about you. You see, and in a way, it's like when this process of being the best version of yourself.
Yeah.
And the best version of yourself is created through the story that you tell yourself. This is because it's so, for example, in the case of women or ethnic minorities, etc., when you are all the time being told that you are not capable, or that you are too curly hair, or that you are too eccentric, or you are too Latin American and too loud, then you start kind of feeling it. But if you own that story and say, yes, I am all of that, then so there is that thing about creating your story, listening to other stories that other people make about you, and remake your own story, and own it.
Yeah.
Whatever it is.
I love that. And you're reminding me actually of this question about, so, you talk about this narrative, the story as a collection. Well, let's say events rather. There are the event. I know some people make the determination, or they distinguish stories from narrative. But I guess in the simplest way, I think about it like, you have a collection of events that have happened. They're just facts. Let's call them facts. The way those events are described, that becomes your narrative. Or some people say that's just the narrative. It's not the whole story. But let's say that that's your story at any given time. It sounds to me like what you're saying is there's an element here of the story we're telling ourselves too, but the stories the world also tell about us be the same. So there is is there a reconciliation in those stories that needs to happen for you to own your story? Or do you just decide what your story is for yourself? You mentioned just now that, it's about the story we want the world to hear about us, or we want to hear about ourselves. So I guess if we're telling ourselves stories, are we telling ourselves stories all the time? And if that's the case, is there some sort of reconciliation that needs to happen between the story we tell ourselves and the story the world tells about us?
I think that, I don't know, in that sense, I am thinking about a lot of writers that that are saying, well, I'm going to tell the story that I want to read, because I don't see myself represented in these stories. I can think of a couple of authors, female Black authors that are saying, let me tell my story, even myself, as a Latin American, I want to tell my story. So I feel that in a way, you choose. In a way, you choose.
Yeah.
You choose. And that's something that we forget, that we choose the story that we want to say. Wow. Yeah, some people can say, you Latinos, you really are on the party, you don't care about things, you're loud or whatever. I can say.
Yeah, you're a good dancer. You're from Colombia, so you must be a good dancer.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever is said, which I am a good dancer, by the way. You know what I mean? You own your story. And the moment that you own your story, that moment when you are owning your story, whatever it is, also a story of trauma, and a story of healing, and a story of transformation, and own the story and tell your own story. At the end of the day, therapy is telling stories, isn't it? So a good therapist makes you good questions for you to create your own narrative and to own your story.
Yeah,
it's very powerful. It's a very powerful device that human beings have. Yeah.
So having kind of moved into this kind of holistic side and about you and your life and owning your story, do you see any limitations or any better uses of stories? So I guess the first part is, are there any limitations to storytelling and how we use them as a human race? And I know sustainability and community engagement is a big part of your work. So do you see that maybe sometimes stories aren't really helpful, or if there's a better way we can use them, or use them more in a particular way. What do you sort of feel about how they're used? And
I don't think that there are true or false things or better or not better. I feel that every story have its place. Even the story of the business kind of marketing type of stories that I talk a lot, they have their place. And it's not a matter of saying, oh, these are business and we don't like them because they are for the capitalistic system. No, look and learn, because they are learning. Management studies is a cannibal discipline. It's eating from everywhere. So look and learn, but I think that it's very important that we tell ourselves stories that are, I'm going to use a word that can be contentious, that are beautiful. Yeah. And there are some, I'm not saying that we are going to prettify and pretend that the world is not that is not so problematic, is to say, okay, from this situation, how can I relate with this situation? What can I learn from this situation and what I can help? I think that element of what or how I can help is very important. And I don't think that there is a single story. The stories are all the time changing. Whatever you're telling me today, you will change it tomorrow. And I'm not going to hold you responsible for what you said yesterday, No, we are changing all the time our narrative. So I feel that in terms of what you are pursuing, which is this mindfulness, being in the moment, kind of living a more kind of holistic, grounded life and make the best of the moment that we have, because and at the same time trying to kind of use the storytelling as a device for developing, moving, growing, whatever. There are not a single formula, there is, but I feel that what it is interesting is, what is the story that we tell ourselves? That's what I would like to share with people. Is that a story of, all of us, we have pains, all of us, we have nostalgia, trauma, but how we tell that story, not even to the world, but for ourselves, If we don't tell a story that it is an empowering story. I mean, Beyonce,
Beyonce, the singer, yeah?
The singer.
Right.
It's a great storyteller.
Yeah.
So Beyonce, great scandal about her husband, cheating on her. What she does, grab the narrative and said, I'm going to tell that story in my terms. And then you say, all right, yes, even Beyonce, Queen Beyonce, goddess of the universe, has pains, and yet look how she owned that narrative and say it. So I feel that this is the question for everybody, is like, what is the story that we are telling ourselves? What is the story that we are telling others? You see? And how that story is building a story of our moment, our generation, our world, our community. Yeah. So it's not, our story is not a single story. It's not that only happened to me. It's connected with groups, with communities, with generations, with cities. No?
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you want to see the stories used differently? Do they need to change you're obviously very big proponent of storytelling, especially bringing it into your education and in your lecturing and so on. So I can probably guess that you would like to see it used more in the way people learn. But in the wider sense, how do you want to see stories used more or differently? I don't necessarily want to say more, but do you want to see them used in any other ways in the world and society?
Well, the world is already, and the society and the system is using the stories all the time, the way that people tell things. But I feel that, again, how that the stories are helping you to understand yourself and to be part of a community and to make changes. At the end of the day, we want to feel that things are happening and that we have a role in them. For example, I'm talking about another space of storytelling is AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, you see?
Yeah.
stories that we tell in Alcoholics Anonymous are very interesting also because they live for the day. This is something that is very clear in the narrative. Today, I'm not going to drink, So it's very simple, but it works. And they tell stories. They share stories, some traumatic, etc. But there is an element of redemption, you see. So where are we? Because let's think about the heroic journey, or the sort of normal storytelling. No, let's say context, a problem, a situation, a heroine, that is facing some obstacles. The magic powers that come, the obstacles that come, the kind of going down the hill, and the redemption, coming back to the village with the all the stories follow a very similar pattern, but sometimes we skip how we can move from the obstacles, from the challenges, to find some magical powers, which we have all magical powers, outside, inside, helps, whatever, and go to the redemption. I feel that the narrative of climate change is one that we need to change in a way, because the narrative of climate change is like fight against climate change. I mean, it's all about we are going to reduce and the numbers, and you're like, well, hold on a minute. Is that the story because it's a very managerial story. It's a very heteronormative story. Fight, because we, the men, human race, we can fight. I don't know. I feel that we need to challenge the stories. That is one element. We need to challenge the dominant stories. And we need to create our own stories and to tell each other more stories.
So there is a kind of a limitation in the respect of how we frame some of the stories. They're quite adversarial. We're using language that sets us up against some kind of, we need a battle. We need someone to go against. So we create this entity so we can write ourselves as humanity into the hero's position, and so that we can have this feeling of gratitude at the end that, oh, we've won that battle, on to the next one. So you feel like that's not necessarily constructive, and especially because, why? Is that because we then have blind spots, or there are things we're not seeing otherwise when we personify climate change, let's say, and we make that our adversary? Does that now mean that we've got a whole set of blind spots and other things we're not considering? Or why is that? Why does that need to change?
Because it ignores the complexity of climate change. It makes it into a sort of something that is manageable. And that if we don't do it, is because we are failing. So that element of, I feel that, as you said, the blind spots of considering a single story, well, Chimananda, and Gosia Adichie, great storyteller, is saying, watch out for a single story. What are the stories that are around? So with climate change particularly, it doesn't, and also because it make it a sort of as an individual quest, and this is not an individual quest. It's a community. It's governments. Is the whole race. So I feel that this is something that can be. I think that we can create other stories, I feel, about climate change and
more narratives, broader
narratives. I don't know, and there are narratives around. There are new narratives about education, and we need to hear more. I think the other thing with narratives is that, especially in the news, bad news make better news.
Unfortunately.
So it makes you feel that the world is full of horrible people. You think the world is full of horrible people. But those people make more noise with their stories than the good people. You see? So I'm like, well, let's hear the good people, what they are saying, let's have a balance,
That's fascinating. And you're making me think about so just going back a couple of steps, and you mentioned the single stories and how sometimes you can miss the richness of what's around because we need to condense it. Is that part of one of the constraints of the storytelling mind, that we need that simplicity? The brain, if you like, can't process, you know, a million heroes on a hero's journey, or the brain can't really take in multiple narratives at once. And because the brain is in effect super efficient, and let's for sake of argument call it lazy.
No, yeah, the path of least resistance. Yeah.
Yeah, the path of least resistance. So does that mean that that's one of the maybe necessities of story? Maybe is that possible? I don't know.
I don't know. I understand that, and we need those little stories to build a wider story.
Mm-hmm.
But in the same way that we are kind of choosing one story, we can choose different stories. And that is also to be critical and to, I will call like a sort of weaving the different stories, no?
Yeah.
Weaving as a sort of metaphor for a story, So you have one thread, you have another thread, you have another thread. Yes, they are built from individual threads, yeah?
Yeah.
But together,
yeah,
we need to weave those stories.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, you're making me think about art again. And so we talked about society, we talked about you know, some big societal issues and how stories relate to them and so on. So and of course your educational role, you know, as Dr. Beatrix, and putting your sort of dreamer oracle artist hat on, which I know is a huge part of your life because it's an integration. How do the stories feature in the art? What's your kind of thoughts on the role of story in the art? Is storytelling itself an art, or you know, how is that? What's the whole thing about that?
I don't know. Well, there is the old distinctions about art and craft. You know, who are the crafters and who are the artists? I really don't see so much of a difference, but I think that the storytelling has that element of the crafting of the storytelling that can become an art. Yeah, I don't think that there are I cannot see that distinction very clearly, but for example, in my art, the thing that I'm going to be exhibiting with Renee next year in Edinburgh is this
is Renee Relixi, the artist who does well, she exhibits all around the country, all around the UK, doesn't she? But one of the famous exhibits is in Edinburgh every summer, right?
Yeah, Renee has been working about the idea of what makes us human. Yeah, and then she did a lot of those sculptures, the heads, and we are going to be working about it. And she's telling a story with us, a sculpture.
Yeah.
So what I'm working for that exhibition is something that is inspired by stories told by indigenous communities in Colombia about how they communicate with other worlds, you know, how they use certain plants, how they use, or they learn, they work with the spirit of animals, especially birds, to heal a person, but to heal nature too. And I'm using collage for doing that. And I feel that collage is a very interesting form of work at every level. Collage is basically a juxtaposition of different elements that are already made, let's call it, but they create something new. There exists collage in music, collage in visual arts, collage in textiles, you know, so you are kind of putting different elements. And it's something very from modernity, you know, let's call it post-modernity if you want, or alter modernity, you know, that idea that everything is already done. So what are we doing to create something new?
Yeah.
I feel that when I'm doing this, I am responsible for telling a story that I listen in my own language from mamas and shamans and wise men and women. And I am using those sort of kind of listening to those stories, and also the process that I did the collage was listening to those stories and working on the collage, so I let me to be a channel for that.
Yeah.
And I hope that my art tells that story. But of course, in order to get an additional layer of the meaning, of course, I want that people react to the work of art by themselves, that the colors, that the forms make them like, oh, what is this? That creates a sensual impression, a sensual story.
Yeah.
And I also would like to add that element of the stories that I heard, the stories that are being lost too. And that is something that we talk about sustainability and climate change and everything. But what about the loss, not only of biodiversity, but cultural diversity? Where are those stories that are so important in the cosmogony of many groups that can tell us so much about us as a human race? So I get that sort of. So yeah, I think that art is also a way of telling a story, and a good art, I would say, or a good crafting is a good way of telling a story that move the audience, move the viewer or the listener or
Yeah. So this, you just got me thinking, you talk about this sensual experience as well. It's almost like I come and I view at the Edinburgh Fringe, let's say, your exhibition, and you've channeled as having listened to the stories of the elders and the wise ones of the tribes and all kinds of historical references and passed down and natural stories from the natural world, and you put this into a print, let's say, or design. You juxtapose that. A new juxtaposition is created from my witnessing, because I guess when I witness that in my own experience, my own story projection goes on to that as well, doesn't it? So there's this constant evolution of a living, breathing thing.
But this is the weaving that we were talking about. There is some threads here that you connect sensually, and there is a new thread.
Yeah.
And the story moves.
Yeah.
And this is because I don't think that nobody owns stories.
Yeah.
So that element of that, I own this story or I own this joke, it makes me laugh, because we are all the time evolving, and I don't want to own a story. I want that story makes you grow, makes you think, move you, even if it is with disgust or with or kind of or pleasure or it doesn't matter. But it's already, so this story that I'm telling, when it's listened or appreciated or captured or experienced by you, it moves.
Yeah. Wow. Stories cannot be captured and caged. They are free to live their own lives as if they were a being themselves. I love that.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if you have read the book of Elizabeth Gilbert, Big Magic.
No, I know her. She did Eat, Pray, Love, didn't she?
Yeah, but Big Magic,
I don't know.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
She has a story, and then she's like that the stories and ideas are looking for hosts,
Yeah.
So she got an idea, but she at that moment she was not ready. It was an idea of a book of a woman who goes to the Amazon and looking for the husband, blah, blah, blah. She had the idea, but at that time she was not ready to hatch that idea. 2 months later, 3 months later, a friend of hers said to her, you know what? I have an idea of a book about a woman who goes to the Amazon. And she's like,
that's my idea.
That was my idea. But then she realized I didn't give a space to that idea, and that idea moved. So what can I do? Let it free, because it's an idea,
Amazing. Yeah. So stories are there for everyone. They're in the ether, and we can put our own interpretation, we evolve them, we juxtapose them, we mix and match, we do all kinds of things. And that adds to the richness and the diversity of the opportunity to evolve ourselves, is what I'm hearing from you. I mean, that's what I'm sort of learning, speaking to you, that there is a real opportunity to not just create new stories, but to also evolve them, but widen our receptivity to the various stories that are there in the different mediums, like art, like oral traditions, like music, and all these different ways of getting stories. Wow. Yeah.
What is your story, Calvin? What is your favorite story, your favorite fairy tale, your favorite poem, the favorite myth?
There's one that always comes to mind. I don't know if this is my favorite, but it certainly stuck with me because it's attached to an actual certain certain memory, and it's Amos and the Amazing Fish. That's a really old one that I read when I was a child, and it was a book that basically takes me back to really affectionate memories, essentially, and it actually got me, you know, in love with reading. So I read a lot of stories as a child because of that, and it's really about basically a fish who kept a man in a tank. So this man was in a tank in the water, basically the fish's home, and it was quite an interesting flipping of perspective, and it was really, really fascinating. But love stories. I mean, I love. There's a number of films that I love. I love The Lord of the Rings because of the imagination involved in that. I love The Matrix because of the kind of deep psyche and that kind of exploration of the different realities. The Chrysalid is a book that got me reading again, and that's one that again invokes romantic memories of my sister. So there's a lot of richness there.
Let's come back to the fish. How does it end, the story?
I'm trying to remember now the details, and I think that eventually the man wanted to be free, basically, and I think the fish showed him some mercy, and he was able to return to his normal life. But then he also himself evolved because he learned the experience of, on the flip side, of what it was like to be caged and used as an ornament and not having your freedom. So yeah, it's quite fascinating. Yeah,
that is a very powerful story, and that is more or less what we were talking about, the story of Tarif, that author that I mentioned.
Yeah,
that he goes and tries to find that story and ask people about that favorite story of a childhood. Because it tells so much about ourselves, that story, that sort of being in different dimensions, being in others' shoes, freedom.
Yeah.
Also being the jailer, but also being the
prisoner, the jailed.
The prisoner,
yeah.
You know, so and also it's great because it can tell you a lot about the way that we live things too. And how to evolve with the story, because you evolve with the story. You read it when you were a child, it makes an impression. Now that you're telling me the story, it is making, I'm sure, other type of connections, isn't it?
Yeah, because of course at the time I didn't have the perspective to be able to say, oh, I see that he's changed his perspective because he's had a he's evolved. I would not have thought of that as a child, but that's the power of the stories, right? They plant those seeds, and those seeds sprout, and you can see them as big, mighty oaks from all kinds of different perspectives later on in life. You know, you're up in the tree, or you're down on the ground, or you're looking at it from a certain angle in a certain light, but it's the same tree. So I think that's a beautiful analogy for making me remember that story. So yeah, thank you for asking. Oh, before you go, I just want to say thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe to my channel. It means a lot more than you know. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Bye for now.